Democratic leader Chuck Schumer has a plan to take back the majority in the Senate, and that plan runs right through Maine and Senator Susan Collins. Joining us now, Semaphore Congressional Bureau Chief Burgess Everett and Basil Smikle still here at the table with me. So I'll start with you, Burgess. Schumer gave you some more insight here about why he thinks they'll win. What was his message, his path?
Yeah, I mean, there's two things going on here. One is that Maine is on paper the most winnable Senate seat. Susan Collins defended it, though, very handily against a similarly tough Democratic challenge in 2020. This race has been complicated by Graham Plattner's seemingly endless news stories about his controversies. On the other side of that, there's 5 other states that Schumer thinks that Democrats can flip. They need to flip 4 of them. But in Schumer's view, Collins' seat is still one of the easier ones. And you can hear that as he goes after her. He says she's caught in a tough place with Donald Trump. The Republicans cut Medicaid and she was not able to stop it in the big, beautiful bill last year. So you can see how Senator Schumer really wants a redo on the 2020 loss to Senator Collins, which carried all sorts of implications for the way the Senate worked because of Collins's centrality kind of in the middle of the Senate. But Schumer is not going to miss his chance this time, and he's going to probably plow a ton of resources and time into defeating her, regardless of who their nominee is, because he wanted Governor Janet Mills instead of Graham Plattner.
Well, you know, so much of the conversation in Maine has focused just on Graham Plattner as a human being and his personal failings. And I'm not the first to point to this, but I don't think it has reached much of the national discussion. There's some interesting polling from Maine that was taken just a couple weeks ago, back in May, that shows that almost half of Harris voters in the state believe that actually it was Kamala Harris who won the 2024 election. You can see that right there, 44%. That's a shocking number for almost half of Democrats to actually believe that the last presidential election may have been stolen. Basil, what does that indicate to you about what's going on in the Democratic base right now?
Well, it's not just the Democratic base, which I'll get to, but I think it's a lot. I think if you focus on what Donald Trump does, you have to realize that claims of election fraud cut both ways, because as Donald Trump talks about fraud being the case in the Democratic side, and and we see the rate in Ohio and so on and so forth, you're going to have people who generally believe that elections are safe and secure saying, well, if you doth protest too much, if you're talking about us rigging elections, maybe it's just projection. Maybe what we need to be focused on is what you're doing to potentially rig elections. And if we think about all of the bureaucracy that's at his disposal, and the FBI raiding offices, National Guard potentially being at election sites, people who normally think that their vote's going to be secure are now starting to say, well, let me focus more on this intimidation factor. But what are you doing to actually focus to rig elections? So that cuts both ways. The other point about Democrats is important in that, I think a lot of Democrats, related to the other point I was making, are taking a really hard look at our processes, right? There is this massive distrust for institutions, and that cuts across race, that cuts across ethnicity, but it not just generational, by the way, because I think across the board, whether it's elections, whether it's political parties, there is real concern about the role of institutions in our country, and I think some of that is embedded in those numbers. So you see it on the Republican side, you'll see it on the Democratic side, and one of the big challenges for Schumer is trying to get people to believe that institutions still matter and that the Senate really does matter. We know it, but to get a lot of voters to really embrace that.
Yeah. Burgess, to what extent do you think some of what's coming out in Maine that Democratic leaders are trying to figure out how to respond to, and this builds on sort of what Basil was saying and also on reporting from colleagues of mine like Kevin Fry, who's gone to Maine, spoken to people directly, and kind of they describe their anger as being like, well, we voted for people who had the right resume, people who wore the right suit, people who did all the right things, and still somehow we got hurt. So
Yeah, I mean, and you're seeing Plattner's response to the reporting on him, which is kind of blasting the mainstream media. It's a little bit of a lesson that I think Democrats may be learning from Trump, which is that you can push back against these negative stories and potentially survive them. I think I will just pull my Maine card here real quick, because I'm from Maine. I grew up there. And I wanted to just let everybody know that the voters we're talking about that are going to decide this Senate race are a very small subset of the population. population. And the key for Graham Plattner to win, this is a state of about 1.4 million people, is to win over older women who have already voted for Susan Collins in the past. And so in 2020, Maine Democrats tried running Sarah Gideon, the House Speaker at the time, against Susan Collins, and that did not work. Susan Collins was able to survive that. Janet Mills was a similar sort of mainstream candidate. Graham Plattner is not that. So this is almost an experiment now in what kind of candidate could beat kind of one of the more centrist members of the Senate. This isn't like a pro-MAGA Republican that Democrats are trying to beat. So it's a very unique case. She's the only senator in the Republican conference now representing a reliably blue state.